The gilded stage. The roar was a physical force, a tidal wave of adoration that crashed against the stage. Under the blinding constellation of stadium lights, two figures moved in perfect, electrifying harmony. Xiao Zhan, with a smile that could melt glaciers and eyes that held entire constellations, spun with a grace that belied his strength. Wang Yibo, a study in controlled intensity, his movements sharp and precise, countered him, their energy creating a vortex that held 50,000 people spellbound. This was the zenith, the final concert of their world tour, a tour born from the explosive success of their drama, The Untamed. On stage, they were Wei Wuxian and Lan Wangji, their on-screen chemistry so potent it bled into reality, creating a legend of its own. Off-stage, they were Zhan and Lao Wang, a bond whispered about in fan forums and celebrated in millions of social media posts. They were the ultimate CP, a pair whose friendship felt like destiny. After the final bow, drenched in sweat and euphoria, they collapsed into each other's arms in the privacy of the dressing room. The noise of the world faded to a distant hum. "We did it, Yibo," Xiao Zhan breathed, his head resting against Yibo's shoulder. The scent of stage smoke and Yibo's faint cologne was the smell of victory. Yibo, usually a man of few words, tightened his embrace. "We always do." His voice was a low rumble against Xiao Zhan's chest. "Together." That word hung in the air, sacred and solid. Together. It had been their anchor through grueling schedules, malicious rumors, and the relentless scrutiny of fame. Yibo was the fortress, impenetrable and fiercely protective. Xiao Zhan was the garden within, vibrant and warm, the only one who could make the fortress's walls soften. But the highest peaks are often the most treacherous, and the brightest lights cast the darkest shadows. Part 2, The First Crack. It began subtly. A leaked, out-of-context photo from a private dinner, showing Xiao Zhan laughing with a rising actress. Harmless, but the caption from a notorious gossip blog was venomous. Xiao Zhan's new muse? Wang Yibo sidelined. Yibo scoffed when his manager showed him. "Stupid. They'll write anything." Xiao Zhan sent him a laughing emoji in their private chat. "Our fans know better than to believe this, right?" Yibo replied, the simple affirmation carrying his usual confidence. But then came the script. Desert Fury, a big-budget action film from a legendary director, a role every young actor in China coveted. It was a solo lead, a chance to break out of the CP image and be seen as a serious, standalone star. Both their agencies submitted their names. The industry held its breath. It was an unspoken rule. The project would only go to one of them. To cast both would invite endless comparison and distract from the film itself. One evening, in the sanctuary of Xiao Zhan's apartment, the tension was palpable. "The director called me," Yibo said, his voice carefully neutral as he played with the hem of his hoodie. "He said he was impressed with my motorcycle stunts in my last project. He thinks I have the physicality for Desert Fury." Xiao Zhan's smile was genuine, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "That's amazing, Yibo. You'd be perfect for it." He paused. "My agent says the producer is very keen on my commercial appeal." The air grew thick. It was the first time their ambitions had been laid so bare, a silent competition placed on the coffee table between them. "I would never let a role come between us," Xiao Zhan said softly, his gaze earnest. Yibo looked at him, his dark eyes unreadable. Nothing could. But a seed of doubt, tiny and poisonous, had been planted. Part 3, The whispers turned to shouts. The leaks became more targeted, more vicious. An anonymous source close to the production claimed Wang Yibo was difficult to work with and unprofessional on set. The source was always vague, but the timing was suspicious, right before the final decision for Desert Fury was to be made. Yibo's team was in damage control mode. He became quieter, more withdrawn. The easy banter between him and Xiao Zhan during public events felt forced. Fans noticed. The hashtag what is happening to Wang Yibo trended, filled with concern and confusion. Xiao Zhan tried to bridge the growing distance. He called, he texted, he suggested they grab hot pot. Yibo's replies were brief, delayed. "Busy." In meetings. Tired. The final blow came on a rainy Tuesday. A major entertainment outlet dropped a bombshell, a series of private text messages allegedly between Xiao Zhan and his agent. The texts discussed a strategy to undermine Wang Yibo's reputation to secure the Desert Fury role. The language was shockingly specific, mentioning the difficult-to-work-with rumor and even suggesting a plan to leak fabricated stories about Yibo's personal life. The evidence was damning. The phone numbers in the screenshots were partially obscured but matched known digits. The colloquialisms used were classic Xiao Zhan. The internet exploded. The betrayal was seismic. Yibo's fans, the Wang clan, declared war. Xiao Zhan's little fighters were stunned into disbelief, desperately claiming the evidence was fake. But the narrative was too slick, too perfectly tailored to feed the existing speculation. Xiao Zhan's phone blew up. His agent was frantic. Zhan, I swear on my life, those texts are fabricated. We never said any of that. But Xiao Zhan wasn't listening. He was staring at a single line on his screen, a text from Yibo sent just minutes after the story broke. It contained only 2 words. Why Zhan? The pain in those 2 words was a physical blow. Xiao Zhan's world tilted on its axis. He tried to call. Straight to voicemail. He sent a flood of messages. Yibo, it's not true. You have to believe me. It's a setup. Silence. A silence more deafening than any stadium roar. The bond that had felt unbreakable had not just been strained. It had been publicly, brutally shattered. The silent abyss. The announcement came a week later. Wang Yibo had been cast in Desert Fury. The victory felt hollow. The industry saw a king crowned, but the king sat on a throne of ashes. Yibo threw himself into the punishing filming schedule in the Gobi Desert, his social media becoming a wasteland of official promotional posts. The lively, competitive boy who loved racing and dancing was gone, replaced by a stoic, impenetrable man. Xiao Zhan was left in the wreckage. His reputation was in tatters. Brand deals were put on hold. The warmth in his eyes was replaced by a constant, weary sadness. He replayed every moment, every conversation, looking for a clue, for the face of the true betrayer. Who could have fabricated those texts with such malicious precision? Who had access? His mind kept circling back to one person, Lin Mo, Yibo's newly appointed, ruthlessly ambitious publicist. Lin Mo had always been a little too eager, a little too slick. He had made it clear he believed the CP image was holding Yibo back. But to go this far? It seemed impossible. Months bled into a year. They existed in parallel universes, their paths meticulously orchestrated to never cross. The silent tragedy was complete. The world mourned the death of a legendary friendship, a story of betrayal that had become modern folklore. Part 5. The Glimmer in the Darkness. The event was the annual Magnolia Awards, the most prestigious in Chinese television. Attendance was mandatory for all nominees. Both were nominated in different categories. There was no avoiding it. Xiao Zhan walked the red carpet alone, smiling his professional smile, his heart a drum of anxiety. He saw Yibo across the room, surrounded by his team, including the smirking Lin Mo. Yibo looked handsome, successful, and utterly remote. Their eyes met for a fractured second, a flash of something unidentifiable in Yibo's gaze before it shuttered closed. The night dragged on. Xiao Zhan lost his category. To his shock, Yibo won his. As Yibo gave his acceptance speech, polite, concise, emotionless, Xiao Zhan felt a fresh wave of grief. This wasn't the Yibo he knew. Needing air, he slipped out to a secluded balcony overlooking the Shanghai skyline. He leaned against the railing, closing his eyes against the glittering lights, feeling more alone than ever. A presence materialized beside him. He didn't need to look. He felt him. You didn't do it, did you? Yibo's voice was low, rough, stripped of its public facade. Xiao Zhan's eyes flew open. He turned to face him. The year of silence, of pain, was a chasm between them. No, he whispered, his voice cracking. I would never. I would rather have lost every role in the world than lose you. Yibo studied his face, searching for the truth. The city lights reflected in his eyes, and for the first time, Xiao Zhan saw not coldness, but a deep, profound conflict. I wanted to believe it was a lie, Yibo said quietly. But the evidence, it was perfect. And you got quiet after it happened. You stopped fighting. I stopped fighting because you stopped listening. Xiao Zhan's composure broke. You believed a screen full of lies over 1,000 days of friendship. What was I supposed to do, Yibo? Break down your door? I almost wished you had, Yibo admitted, his own mask slipping to reveal the raw hurt beneath. The silence was worse than the anger. They stood there, the truth hanging between them, fragile and precious. Linimo, Yibo said, the name a curse. I fired him 3 months ago. He got sloppy. Tried to pull a similar stunt with another actor. I started digging. The digital forensics team. It took time, but the texts were a composite. Bits of real conversations from your phone and your agents, spliced together with fabricated lines. The hacker they hired was very, very good. Xiao Zhan felt the world shift. Vindication was a cold, sharp wave. He destroyed us for a movie role? He thought he was securing my future, Yibo said, his voice thick with self-loathing. And I was so blinded by the betrayal, by the fear that maybe you saw me as competition after all, that I let him tear us apart. Tears finally streamed down Xiao Zhan's face, not of sadness, but of release. The silent tragedy had found its voice. Yibo reached out, his hand hovering near Xiao Zhan's cheek before he gently wiped a tear away with his thumb. The touch was electric, a spark reigniting a fire long thought dead. I am so sorry, Zhan. I failed you. I failed us. The sweetness of the moment, after the long, bitter year, was almost unbearable. The thrill of the mystery was solved, but the greater suspense now was what came next. Part 6, The Mosaic of Us. Reconciliation is not a switch that is flipped. It is a mosaic, painstakingly rebuilt piece by piece. There were no grand announcements. Their first meeting was at a dusty, abandoned go-kart track at 4 a.m., just the two of them. They didn't talk much. They raced. The thrill of the competition, the wind whipping past them, felt like washing away the grime of the past year. Slowly, carefully, they began to rebuild. Yibo used his considerable resources and influence to systematically dismantle the false narrative, issuing legal notices and presenting the digital evidence that cleared Xiao Zhan's name. It was his quiet, forceful way of making amends. Their interactions in public remained professional, but the sharp-eyed fans, the ones who had never given up hope, began to notice. The way Yibo's body would unconsciously angle towards Xiao Zhan in a group photo. The way Xiao Zhan's laughter, once so bright and free, began to regain its genuine warmth when Yibo was near. The real healing happened in private. In Xiao Zhan's kitchen, cooking meals together like they used to. On Yibo's dance floor, where the rhythm became their new language. They talked for hours, unpacking the pain, the insecurity, the fear. The bond that was shattered was not simply glued back together. It was reforged in the fires of adversity, stronger and more resilient than before. They had learned a brutal lesson about trust, about communication, about the wolves that hide in plain sight. One evening, a year after the awards night, they were on the balcony of a private villa, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. A new project was on the horizon, a joint venture they had carefully chosen together on their own terms. Xiao Zhan leaned his head against Yibo's shoulder. Do you think they'll ever stop calling it the silent tragedy? He asked, referring to the media's favorite label for their story. Yibo wrapped an arm around him, pulling him close. His voice was firm, filled with the certainty that had once been lost. Let them. Our story isn't a tragedy anymore. It's a thriller with a very sweet ending. And as the stars began to pepper the twilight sky, their silence was no longer a chasm, but a comfortable, understood language. It was the silence of two hearts, once shattered by betrayal, now beating in perfect, unbreakable rhythm once again. The final, thrilling twist was not a reveal of a villain, but the rediscovery of a love that was, and always would be, stronger than any lie.